This will be the first of three short series of videos. And the first one we'll talk about what you see in red is just setting up ratios and proportions with applications. So we'll look at unit rates, what they mean, and we'll look at proportions and how to set those up and how to solve those in a couple of different ways. So for instance, here we have on part A, we have Mark drove 254 miles in 4 hours. So if it's asking for the unit rate is simply asking how many miles per 1 hour. So that's all a unit rate is asking, is just what would it be when it's divided by 1. So you take 254 and you divide it by 4 and you get 63.5 miles per 1 hour. So that would be the answer to part A. What's the unit rate? Part B says, well, how far did Mark travel in 2.5 hours? Well, there's different ways you could do this. You could use your unit rate, and that is the 63.5 miles per 1 hour. And you're trying to figure out, well, how does that equal for 2.5 hours? So what we can see is we've got a product. If I multiply 2.5 by 1, then I need to multiply 63.5 by 2.5. And you get about 158.75 miles. So that's what we would be looking for. And you can divide 158.75 divided by 2.5, and you should get what you have as the unit rate. Part C. Part C is how far did he travel in 7 miles? And it's the same idea. You can use 63.5 miles, and which is to 1 hour, and you just want to figure out how many or how far did he travel in 7 hours. It's the same idea that we did in B. You can multiply by 7, so you're going to multiply 63.5 by 7, and you're going to get 444.5 miles per 7 hours. So again, the unit rate is when you want a ratio. In this case, it is a ratio, but it's also a rate because it's comparing two different units. So this is a special type of rate. It's a unit rate because the denominator is 1. So if we know that an 8-pound bag of ice costs $1.96, so we know that $1.96 per 8-pound bag. And typically we see that written as how much per pound. And if we know it's $1.96 per 8 pounds, it's just asking what's the unit rate for 1 pound. And again, that's the multiplying $1.96 divided by 8. And you get approximately 25 cents a pound. You get about 245 thousandths, but we're looking at money, and we can round the result up. And so we would say approximately 25 cents per pound, and that would be for part A. Part B, how much would a 3-pound ice cost? Well, it's using that same idea as the slide before, and if we know that it's 25 cents per 1 pound, then we just want to know what it would be for 3 pounds, and you're multiplying 1 by 3, so you'd multiply 25 cents by 3, and you would get 75 cents per 3 pounds. Because this ratio, when you divide 75 cents per 3 pounds, when you multiply this ratio, you should equal to this ratio. And then part C says how much would a 12-pound bag of ice cost? It's the same idea. You know your unit rate, and you want to know how many for 12 pounds? Well, as you can see, 1 times 12 would give me 12. So if you take 25 hundredths times 12, and you're going to get $3. So $3 for 12 pounds is the same as 25 cents for 1 pound. Again, the unit rate is how much, in this case, per 1 pound. This one says that there's 90 feet of wire, and 90 feet of wire will weigh approximately 18 pounds. So it's asking, well, how much will 110 feet of wire cost? Okay, so the multiplying isn't as simple as the couple slides before, but we do know that if we multiplied 90 times something to get 110, then we know we can multiply 18 by that as well. So we'll look at a couple of ways. For one, in order to find this, if you know that 90 times something is 110, then you can divide it. So if you take 110 and divide it by 90 on your calculator, you're going to get about 1 2/10 repeating. And that multiplied by 18, and you're going to get approximately 22 pounds. So that's one way, is to figure out, well, what's the product? The product that needs to be, the multiplier. 110 divided by 90 is approximately 1 2/10 repeating. Well, if I take that result in my calculator and multiply it by 18, I'm going to get 22 pounds. Now, there's other ways to solve. You probably maybe grew up hearing cross multiplication. Well, that is another way to do that. Kind of going back up to this first one, you notice that I did 110 divided by 90, and then I multiplied that result by 18, and that's where we found the 22 pounds. So notice that I did a multiplication, 110 divided by 90, and then I multiplied by 118, which means I could have gotten the same thing if I'd have said 110 times 18. Notice that would have been a cross product, and then divide it by 90. So that's the second method, where if you see a proportion, which proportion are two ratios equal to one another, I could say 90 times x, and I get 90x. And I'd say 110 times 18, and I get 90x is equal to 110 times 18, and I'm going to get 1980. Well, if I divide by 90, and then I'm going to get x to equal 22. So I get the same thing as I did before. One I can set up as a cross products, or if I understand the multiplier piece, I notice I set feet to pounds, so this has to equal feet to pounds when I'm doing the comparison. Number 4, I know that gas costs $12.24, but that's for 6 gallons. So if I want to set up a proportion, just means I want to set up another ratio that's equal. I'm saying I want to know what the cost is going to be if it's for 30 gallons. Okay. Well, it's a couple of ways to do this. You could figure out, well, 6 times 5 is 30. So that was a little easier to compute. And I get the same thing. 30 divided by 6 is 5. So that means if I take $12.24 and multiply it by 5, then I'm going to get my numerator, or my dollar amount, which would be $61.20. So $61.20 divided by 30, and I'm going to get the same as if I said $12.24 divided by 6. both of these ratios would equal $2.04 if you compute the ratio. So $61.20 divided by 30, I get 2 4/100. If I take $12.24 and divide it by 6, I get 2 4/100. So let's say that you've got your dollar amount in your gallons and your unknown dollar amount in your gallons. So if you wanted to do cross products, you would say $12.24 times 30, and all that would be divided by, well, not yet, $12.24 times 30, and that's going to equal the other cross product, which would be 6x. Well, remember, you're wanting to solve for x, not 6x, so you would divide by 6. So this goes to 1x, and if you take the $12.24 and multiply it by 30, you get 367 2/10, and if you divide that by 6, you get the 61 20/100, which would be a dollar amount. So you get the same thing. Notice again, I stayed with dollars to gallons, so I have to be consistent dollars to gallons. So Curtis is building a model. So anytime we deal with models and scale factors, the scaling is just saying that for every 1.5 inches on the model is actually representing 1 foot in real life. So we've got the actual drawing to the model. Well, what's the length represent? What length represents 3 1/4 feet? Well, if I know that this 1.5 inch to 1 is going to equal to something, well, since this is a unit rate here, so I know that I'm going to multiply 1 by 3 1/4 to get 3 1/4. So I know I'm going to multiply 1.5 by 3 1/4, and I'm going to get x to be 4 875 thousandths, and that would be inches. And I know that if I take 4 875 divided by 3 1/4, I would get 1.5 as my result. So I could say, just a little twist to it, what if I changed up the comparisons? That'd be 1.5 inches to how many inches is equal to 1 foot is equal to 3 1/4 feet. So a little different here, and if you wanted to do cross products, you could say 1 times x is x, and 1.5 times 3 1/4, and we know that 1.5 times 3 1/4 is equal to 4 875 thousandths. So different ways to set that up. The last few slides, I set it up like inches to feet. This would be inches to feet. Well, I just changed it up a little bit down here, and I did inches to inches and feet to feet. You just got to be careful of what you're comparing, and then just did cross products to get that result. Number 6, I know Anna took a trip to Mexico. Leaving, she decided to convert all of her pesos back into dollars. So how many dollars did she receive if she exchanged 343 pesos? I just want to know how many dollar amounts is that. But we've got to know something. We've got to know the exchange rate, and looks like about 104 pesos for every $5. So we're just trying to figure out what would be that result here. Well, if I say 304 times something is equal to 104, I need to know what that something is, which I don't. And then if I knew what that something would be, problem is I don't know what I'm multiplying it by. So if I go this way and think, well, 343 divided by 104, and I get about 3 3/10. So it'd be about 3 3/10 here. So that means that I'd multiply 5 by 3 3/10 to get that same amount. And that would be roughly $16.50 approximately. Another way to do that is I could do cross products. I could say 5 times 343 is equal to this cross. I've already done that cross product. Now let's look at this cross product. That'd be 104 times x. Well, 343 times 5, and I'm going to get 1,715, and that's equal to 104x. And if I divide both sides by 104, I'm going to get x equal 16, approximately 16 50 hundredths, which would be $16.50. So dollar amount would be $16.50. Now I could ask for the unit rate. I didn't ask it in this, but if I know that there's 104 pesos per $5, then I could divide 104 by 5 and get approximately 21 pesos per $1. And the last problem on this video 1 is a recipe calls for 3.5 cups of flour to make 8 biscuits. Well, how many cups of flour would it take to make 12 biscuits? So notice I did cups to biscuits, cups to biscuits. And if I take 12 and divide it by 8, that will allow me to know what the multiplier would be, and it would be 1.5. So now I could just multiply 3.5 by 1.5, and I'm going to get x to equal 5 1/4. So about 5 1/4 cups. So one way to figure that is I'm not really doing that cross product method. I'm just figuring out what 8 times what is to give me 12. So I'm going to multiply 3.5 by that same multiplier to give me my number of cups. So let's switch it around a little bit and let's do cross products. What if I say 3.5 cups to 1 cup? 3.5 cups to 1 cup would be 8 biscuits to 12 biscuits. So if I did cross products, I would say 3.5 times 12, and that would give me 42. And if I did, of course, this would be X amount of cups, not 1 cup, X amount of cups. And that would be 8 times X, and that would be 8X. So I would have to divide 42 by 8, and I'd get 5 1/4 cups of flour. Same thing that I found up here.